When Nathan Cole staggered into the gates of the Blackthorn Geological Outpost in September 2024, few could recognize the man he had once been. He was barefoot, his skin stretched tight over his bones, a matted beard reaching halfway down his chest, and his only clothing consisted of shredded animal hides, stiff with dirt and old blood. The last time anyone had seen him was 5 years earlier, when he vanished with his closest friend in the Forsaken Ravine, one of the most remote and inhospitable corners of the Black Mesa region. For years, he had been presumed dead. His name carved into a memorial stone alongside dozens of other missing hikers. Now he stood in front of stunned researchers, his hollow eyes fixed on them with the intensity of someone who had wandered through hell itself. But his appearance was not what chilled the blood of those present. It was the story Nathan began to tell. The fate of his friend, the rituals he had been forced to witness, and the secret society that, according to him, still thrived in the canyon's hidden depths. On May 3, 2019, Nathan Cole and his longtime friend Adrian Wells departed from Stonevale City just before sunrise. Nathan, then 29, was a freelance investigative journalist who had recently begun blending his reporting with wilderness photography. Adrian, 31, was an independent filmmaker known for his haunting documentaries about forgotten towns and abandoned places. Together, they envisioned a project that would capture landscapes untouched by human hands, a chronicle of isolation and silence. Their destination was the Forsaken Ravine, a canyon infamous among seasoned hikers for its sheer cliffs, shifting rock shelves, and a silence so deep it unsettled even experienced travelers. Their route followed the hazardous Hollow Spine Trail, a path rarely attempted alone, riddled with jagged descents and blind turns, where one wrong step meant certain death. Despite the risks, the two men were meticulous in their preparations. They carried topographic maps, a pair of GPS trackers, a satellite phone, climbing ropes, and enough provisions for 10 days dried meats, protein bars, iodine tablets, and thermal blankets. Nathan listed his younger sister, Eliza Cole, as his emergency contact, while Adrian provided the number of his widowed father, Henry Wells. The last trace anyone had of them was a satellite text Nathan sent to Eliza on May 5th. "All good here. Canyon's overwhelming. Adrian got breathtaking footage at dawn. Planning to push deeper into side gorges tomorrow. Might lose signal. Don't worry." When May 12th arrived and neither man returned, concern escalated into dread. Search parties were deployed, volunteers, rangers, even helicopters circling the ravine. They discovered a fire-blackened patch of earth, scraps of food packaging, and a scattered coil of rope. But there were no tents, no backpacks, no sign of where the men had gone. For nearly 3 weeks, trained dogs and climbing teams combed the canyon walls and riverbeds. The terrain was merciless, unstable ledges, landslides, and sudden storms. By June, officials announced the grim decision. The search was suspended. Authorities suggested the two men had likely fallen while attempting to capture dramatic footage from the cliffs. Memorial services were held in Stonevale. Insurance claims were processed. Eliza refused to attend the service, clinging to the belief that her brother might still be alive, somewhere beneath the canyon's shadow. Nathan's account began on May 6, 2019, 3 days after his last message. He and Adrian had veered off the Hollow Spine Trail to examine a jagged formation known as the Weeping Stones, a cluster of cliffs where wind whistled through cracks like mournful voices. Adrian, always eager for dramatic shots, moved ahead to scout angles for his camera, while Nathan stayed behind to adjust his tripod and lenses. Moments later, a piercing scream tore through the canyon. Nathan sprinted toward the sound, his gear clattering against his chest. What he saw froze him. Adrian was struggling in the grip of several men who seemed torn out of another century. Their bodies were wrapped in stitched hides, their skin smeared with ash and ochre, their hair braided with feathers and shards of bone. Primitive tattoos spiraled down their arms and faces. Each held weapons, flint knives, stone-tipped spears, and clubs carved from blackened wood. Before Nathan could react, 3 more figures emerged from the rocks. Surrounding him with startling silence, he tried to shout, but a hand clamped over his mouth. His wrists were bound with twisted plant fibers that cut into his skin, and a gag silenced his protests. The men stripped him of his boots, jacket, and pack, then forced him barefoot over a narrow ledge that hugged the canyon wall. The rocks shredded his feet as they drove him forward, deeper into a maze of hidden cracks invisible from the main trail. Hours later, bleeding and half delirious, Nathan was shoved through the mouth of a cavern concealed by a curtain of brush. Inside, the air was heavy with smoke and damp stone. Flickering torchlight revealed a network of tunnels that seemed carved over centuries' walls, etched with crude symbols, chambers lined with animal skins, alcoves stacked with baskets of roots and dried meat. At the center lay a broad stone altar, slick with dark stains, and decorated with skulls of animals, and perhaps humans, painted with spirals and jagged shapes. The men called themselves the Brood of the Serpent. Their leader, a scarred elder known only as the Pale Father, presided over them with a voice that rasped like dry leaves. His eyes, pale and milky, seemed to see more than sight should allow. Nathan and Adrian were locked in a side chamber, where they were fed once a day. Strips of charred meat, bitter roots, and a foul-tasting broth that left their mouths numb. Each dawn, they were dragged to the altar. There, to the sound of guttural chants and drums made from stretched hide, their captors sliced shallow cuts across their palms, letting the blood drip onto the stones. The air reeked of herbs and smoke, thick enough to choke. Nathan tried to plead, to reason, but the cultists ignored him, speaking only in low, broken words, or sometimes not at all. Their rituals were methodical, unwavering, as if guided by laws older than memory itself. 2 weeks into their captivity, Adrian decided he could endure no more. His patience, always thinner than Nathan's, snapped during one of the rituals, when the cultists seemed distracted by the pounding of their drums. That night, as torchlight flickered and smoke clouded the chamber, Adrian whispered to Nathan that he would make a run for it the moment the guard's eyes turned. Nathan tried to stop him, hissing through cracked lips, "Don't! They're watching, always!" But Adrian's desperation outweighed his caution. When the chants reached their peak, Adrian shoved one of the cultists aside and bolted toward the shadowed exit. For a heartbeat, Nathan thought he might actually escape. The pounding drums masking his footfalls, the torchlight failing to catch his fleeing shape. But the brood moved with terrifying speed. 3 men tackled Adrian before he reached the tunnel. His screams echoed against the cave walls as they dragged him back to the altar. What followed was punishment so brutal that Nathan could barely describe it later without trembling. A pit, lined with stones and filled with glowing embers, had been prepared near the altar. Adrian was bound with sinew ropes, his wrists and ankles lashed tight. The cultists chanted louder, their voices rising like a storm as they lowered him closer and closer to the flames. Nathan, gagged and forced to his knees, could do nothing but watch as the firelight painted his friend's face in horror. Adrian's screams tore through the cavern until smoke and ash drowned them out. The stench of burning flesh clung to Nathan's skin and hair for weeks after. From that night forward, everything changed. Adrian was gone, and Nathan became the sole captive. Yet the cult no longer treated him as just a prisoner. Instead, he was forced to take part in their rituals, wearing animal masks, arranging bones upon the altar, smearing paint onto his own scarred skin. Refusal meant fresh wounds, burns from heated stones, deep cuts across his arms. Over time, Nathan's body became a map of scars, some shallow, others jagged, all reminders of his submission. Worst of all, during one ritual, the Pale Father pressed a spiral brand, glowing hot, into Nathan's chest. The mark never healed properly, and every time the cult chanted, it seemed to throb with a pain that sank into his bones. The days bled into weeks, and the weeks into years. Time lost all meaning inside the labyrinth of caverns. Nathan learned to count the passing seasons only by the shifting breath of the wind through cracks in the stone cool in winter, burning in summer. His beard grew into a tangled shroud, his hair wild, his skin marked with scars both deliberate and accidental. The cult did not simply hold him captive. They reshaped him. He was no longer a man, but a symbol to them. Each morning, he was led barefoot across the jagged floor to the altar chamber. There, under the torchlight, they cut his palms, painted his body with ochre, and forced him to chant syllables he could not understand. Resistance meant lashes or fire. He learned quickly that obedience, even feigned, bought him small mercies. An extra scrap of meat, a less painful wound, a moment alone in silence. Nathan's world became one of ritual and survival. He carried bones, mixed bitter brews of crushed roots, and wore grotesque masks of animal skulls during ceremonies. Nights were worse. The walls echoed with the screams of other captives, some fleeting, some enduring. Many disappeared, and their absence was never spoken of again. Years etched themselves into his body. He bore spiraling tattoos burned into his flesh with glowing brands, his skin a map of torment. Yet his mind clung to fragments of sanity by observing, by remembering. Slowly, quietly, he began to search for weaknesses in the cavern walls. Water seeped from above, dripping steadily, wearing away the stone. He took note of the places where the limestone crumbled at a touch. Escape was impossible under the constant watch of the Serpent's children. Yet Nathan became patient. He waited, studying every passage, every torch, every careless glance of his captors. His hope was a fragile ember, nearly extinguished, but it never went dark. Someday, he promised himself, the canyon would open a door and he would crawl through it, even if it cost him the last shred of strength. The chance came not in silence, but in fury. In the summer of 2023, the canyon was struck by a storm unlike anything Nathan had ever heard. The walls trembled as thunder rolled through the stone like the growl of some ancient beast. Water poured from the heavens in torrents, flooding narrow gullies, forcing the cult deeper into their caverns. That night, as the rain pounded overhead, Nathan felt the earth itself shudder. A section of the ceiling in one of the lesser tunnels cracked, sending dust and fragments of limestone down like hail. The Serpent's children shouted in panic, rushing to clear debris before it sealed off their passageways. Nathan saw his opening. For months, he had been loosening the edges of a fragile wall where water constantly dripped. Now, the storm did the work for him. While his captors labored by torchlight in the main chamber, he slipped away, pressing his body against the wet stone until he found the fissure. The crack was narrow, jagged, but real. With bleeding hands, he clawed at the loose rock, tearing nails, ripping flesh, forcing the stones apart. At last, a hollow opened, dark, wet, smelling of fresh air. His heart hammered as he pushed himself through, shoulders scraping, ribs catching on the sharp edges. Behind him, he thought he heard shouts, but the storm swallowed all sound. He crawled for what felt like hours, dragging himself through mud and dripping passages, until suddenly, without warning, the tunnel spat him out into the open. Dawn was breaking. He lay gasping at the bottom of a hidden canyon, rainwater streaming down the cliffs around him. For the first time in years, the sky stretched overhead, pale and limitless. He was free, though freedom tasted of blood, mud, and terror. Nathan stumbled through the hidden canyon for 3 days, surviving on roots, small pools of rainwater collected in rock depressions, and whatever edible plants he could find. His body ached with every step, muscles atrophied from years of captivity, cuts and scars raw from constant friction against the jagged canyon walls. Yet, every step carried him closer to freedom. On the 4th day, he climbed a narrow ridge and reached Skywatch Point, a jagged overlook that jutted out above the main canyon. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the cliffs in shades of gold and crimson. Nathan's eyes, dulled by years in darkness, blinked against the brightness. It was there that he saw Daniel Harper, a tourist from Oregon, who had come to photograph the canyon's sunrise. Harper froze at the sight of a man who looked half wild, barefoot, and covered in scars, with tangled hair and beard falling to his chest. Without hesitation, he called for help, staying by Nathan's side until park rangers arrived. By the time the rangers reached him, Nathan was dehydrated, near collapse, and in shock. His body bore the marks of ritual scars, burns, and the spiral brand on his chest. Psychologically, he was shattered, his mind still haunted by the horrors of years in captivity. The National Park Service cordoned off the area Nathan had indicated, and a specialized task force was dispatched. Local detectives, FBI agents, and anthropologists combed the canyon. They discovered a hidden cave system matching Nathan's descriptions. Fire pits, stone tools, remnants of animal hide clothing, and human bones. Among them were remains consistent with his friend, Adrian, confirming Nathan's account of what had happened during captivity. Nathan's rescue made headlines, but freedom came at a staggering cost. Months of rehabilitation in Phoenix taught him to walk without pain, eat without fear, and sleep without constant nightmares. Yet the shadows of the cave never left his mind. Psychologists diagnosed him with complex post-traumatic stress disorder and dissociative identity disorder. Every scar, every burn, every mark of the spiral brand was a reminder of the years lost. Crowds, enclosed spaces, and technology remained alien and frightening. Even the simplest tasks, answering a phone, opening a door, required immense courage. He moved in with his sister, Olivia, in Denver. She created a stable home, nurturing patience and vigilance, helping him navigate the world he had been ripped away from for half a decade. Slowly, Nathan began to reclaim fragments of a normal life, though he remained forever changed. The authorities implemented stricter controls in the Forsaken Ravine. Patrols were increased, surveillance cameras installed, and all hikers required GPS registration. Scholars debated whether the Serpent's children had truly existed. Yet the physical evidence, ritual objects, human remains, cave markings, proved that Nathan's ordeal was real. Though alive, Nathan carried the burden of what he had endured. Freedom had been regained, but at the cost of innocence, safety, and years stolen in darkness. The canyon's secrets, the cult's rituals, and the cries of lost friends lingered forever in his memory, shaping a life of vigilance, caution, and haunted resilience.